Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi. And today I'm very excited because we have Bryan Wetzel, and he is an author, and he's going to talk about the educational system today, something that's really needs to be addressed. There's a lot of things in our educational society that really has a lot of issues, and a lot of things need to be worked out. And today, Bryan is here to discuss some of those things and maybe give us some solutions and ideas and talk about his book and advice on how to overcome a lot of these issues. So, Bryan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm honored to have you on. Can you tell
Thank
everybody?
you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Can you tell everybody a little about yourself and what you do?
So, what I do, I wear a lot of hats typically. I'm a workaholic as it is, but I'm an entrepreneur. But before I was an entrepreneur, I was primarily in media, TV, commercials for about 25 years. And then that led into starting a company that was to designed to help with K through 12 education. And it was from that experience that I became an author because I wrote a book called The Real Problems Destroying Education. And it's really just, it was built on my experience, working with school districts, teachers, administrators all around the country.
I think there's a lot of issues that we have in our school systems, and teachers struggle. There's a lot of conflictions, a lot of difference in opinions. I think one of the people, one of the group of people that get hurt the most are the children, and a lot of people have things to say, and they try to push things, but fact versus myth is something that we have to take into consideration. Everyone has something to say, but they are but people don't usually understand what's going on behind the scenes. They just see it from the
Hmm.
glorified side, and or they hear what they hear on TV, and
Hmm.
they immediately have an opinion without really knowing what true facts are. So maybe you could shed light and explain to people what's really going on in our school systems and what are some of the issues that we really need to understand and maybe focus on and maybe help out and be proactive about.
Right. Well, the subtitle of the book is that everyone is to blame. And one of the reasons I made that the subtitle is that there's a tug of war that goes on with everybody's desires and everybody's needs, whether that be the district or the administrator at the local school. The teachers have, they have their desires and what they think should happen. The parents have, their issues, and everybody is pushing and pulling, and it's just not working out very well. And what's happening in this instance is I've talked to many people about this, but we're losing good teachers.
Yeah.
There's a shortage of teachers right now, and that's a bad thing because a teacher has been in the classroom for many years. For instance, in when we started our company, it was video education where we had a real teacher in the screen. And I made sure that we got teachers who had been teaching for at least 10 years. And the reason is that a teacher who has been teaching that subject for multiple years, no matter what it is, they understand not only how to teach it, they know what questions they're going to get. They know where the students are going to struggle, what they're going to have trouble understanding. And so they get better the longer they're in it. And you typically your really good teachers, they're not moving up to administration. They want to teach, but more and more what's happening to the teachers is they're getting more heaped onto them because of budget cuts. So, for instance, a teacher who is in charge of RTI, which is a program for helping students who are struggling, has to keep the minutes of all the meetings with parents, not just their parents, but other teachers' parents. They're basically a part-time paralegal at this point, but there used
Right.
to be someone else who did that, but they
Yeah.
got rid of that in most school districts. So now it's a teacher's job. Teachers do not get paid extra for that. Teachers often spend out of their own pocket. Nowadays, behavior seems to be an issue. I did a survey of 480 teachers and asked for them to rank their top five reasons why they got out of education.
Right.
And number one was behavior. Number three was pay. Most people would think pay was number one, but it's
Right.
behavior. It's gotten worse, and I have some really crazy stories. I had one teacher that Mr. Allen that we got from California, excellent math teacher. He had a day, he went to lunch, came back, and there was literally a knife in his whiteboard with a note that says, "You watch your back."
Wow.
And so that's an extreme case, but one of the things that teachers tell me is that even in a upper middle class area, they're getting the behavior is just exponentially getting worse, and they don't feel like the administration has got their back. The administration's in a tough for the school administration. They're in a tough place because what they don't want is for the parents to go to the school board or the district because that looks bad on them. So
Hmm.
what they do is they placate it at the school level.
Yes.
But now that upsets the teacher because the teacher who knows that a student shouldn't be in the classroom because they're disruptive daily, calling them names, cussing them out, even as young as first and second grade, I've heard this. That teacher is not happy about this. And by the way, that's a whole year they're going to go along with that situation.
Yeah.
Um, The second reason that they below behavior was just that the workload has continued to get heavier and heavier and heavier. They're not being allowed to teach. Nowadays, they're being told every year that they have to teach something this way, as if
Right.
there's one way to teach.
Right.
Most teachers who have been in it for a while, they know how to teach. Just let them teach. That's the one thing I kept hearing. I just want to
Yeah.
teach and I don't want to do all this other stuff. I don't want to be in political stuff with the administration and I don't want to be teaching social issues. I don't want to be teaching religion. I don't want to be doing any of that. I just
Right.
want to teach. And I'll tell you a funny story. I had a teacher who she was we hired her for Skubes because she was everybody recommended they're like she's great. She was in Florida. I was doing a, trade show there for our company and teachers kept coming by said you have to get her. You have to get her. So we flew her to Georgia and we had her stay here for a little over a week and she did all of her educational videos and she was telling me that she at the beginning of the school year that year, all before the students had come back, the teachers are back for the week before. They were all in the lunchroom having a meeting with and hearing from the principal and the vice principal. And the principal asked her to stand up and said, we give her a hand because all of her students came in low and left her class with really good scores. And now everything is, and then right after that, everybody sat down and he says, okay, you're not going to teach that way this year. We have a new way of doing it. And that just doesn't make any sense to my brain. I don't
Oh,
understand that. If you were in a corporate environment, for instance, and let's say a salesperson or a sales team was just killing it,
right.
sales were above everybody else, you would have them come down and say, listen, we want you to tell all the other sales teams, what are you doing that is getting you those that those high scores.
Yeah.
But instead, they're saying, nah, that was last year. This year, we're going to do it this way. We don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to do it anyway. And that is a regular issue that I heard numerous times. And that a lot of them were very frustrated. It's amazing. When I would go to schools to talk to teachers, the number one question I would get is, are y'all hiring? And
Mm.
that's sad. These are people who went to school to be a teacher. They went through student teaching. They interned,
Mm-hmm.
which is called TOS, and now they don't want to be in that profession anymore.
Right.
And I know that there's a funny thing that I've noticed when I talk to people in the public, they'll say, "Well, a lot of teachers are just lazy. They just took the job to have summers off." I'm like, and that's not really the case.
Yeah.
In my wife's case, and a lot of females, they it's a great job if you have a young child. You can't take your child to work with you if you work at a corporation.
Right.
But if you work at an elementary school, they can go to the same school with you. You can drive them to school, bring them home. So in that it's an ideal. career.
Yeah.
Um, and you do get your summers off, but that's a bonus. It's a very stressful job. I've watched my wife, and I know so many other teachers that they're all stressed out. And sadly, in the book, I have statistics in there about how many of them are on anti-anxiety medicine. It's close to 40%, 40 to 45% of the teachers. Um, that's not a good thing, in my opinion.
Right.
And that's not a good way to sustain education.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they just need more help. They need less stress. We need to
Yes.
handle behavior. When I was young, if I had told my teacher to F off, I would have been out of school
Right.
and they would have sent me to an alternative school or something else. And I know there's people say, well, that's just not fair to that one child, but we have to consider the fact that there's a whole room of other kids who want to maybe learn or at
Yeah.
least want to do well. And now there's maybe one or two kids who are disrupting that.
Yeah.
And so, how do you square that so that everybody's happy? There isn't a way.
Right.
There's no way to do it. Um, I'll tell you this too. What I think I told you this in our pre-interview, but when I first got into it, making school resources and then going out and meeting with districts, I thought that once I got a peek behind the curtain,
Mm-hmm.
I would go, "Oh, I know. That does make sense. Now I see why y'all made those decisions."
Right.
I was actually just more perplexed. You, so let's like, for instance, there's a, there's a very broad understanding of what to do to increase scores. From my point of view, I feel like a lot of districts and a lot of states are doing the opposite of
Mm-hmm.
what. And so I understand why people have a conspiracy about this.
Yes.
But let's take California, for instance. To California and the teachers I spoke to, which they were mostly from LA Unified District, they don't give below a D anymore. If you don't answer one question, if they hand you a test and you ball it up and throw it in a trash can, you get a D. You cannot fail. So how do you, at the end of the year, how does a college, besides maybe the SAT or the ACT, how do you figure out if a student is ready for college
Right.
when they have never had to really get any grades?
Yeah.
It gets even worse because some of the districts have now instituted where a homework assignment, a test, a project, a report, you have the entire year to hand it in.
Wow.
Yeah. And do you have kids?
I have three.
I have mine are in their 20s now, so I've gotten through what I thought was the hardest part.
Yeah.
Turns out that might not be true,
I'm with
but
you.
it's just different set of problems now. It's not the old ones.
Yeah.
But the what the teachers I spoke to said is that the kids go, "Oh, I don't have to do it right now. I'll save it all and do it towards the end of the year." But then they
Wow.
never get it done because they forgot or it's too much that they have heaped upon themselves at the end of the school year, and they're not. So I talked to someone at the district level about this, and they said, "Well, we don't want to stress them out by telling them it has to be done by Friday." And I said, "Well, but that's kind of how the world works.
It
Like when
does.
I was working for a company, they didn't tell me you've got 12 months
Yeah.
to turn in your reports. I had to have them in by a deadline."
Right.
Um, and that seems logical to me. Social issues are really big, particularly in more progressive areas. And so they have decided that they're going to teach social issues in every class, including math. And at first, I didn't understand how that could be, but I'll give you a good example from Dr. James Lindsay.
Hmm.
Is that so? Let's say that you have a word problem, and it says, I think his example was that the your a mom and dad is getting in a you're going to go to an amusement park for the week for sat on a Saturday,
Right.
and the amusement park is 20 miles away, and it costs this and that's part of the word problem. But what happens now is the teachers are taught to say, now, how many of you have a mom and a father. Okay, so now you're getting into divorce issues. And then how many of you have been to an amusement park? And some of the kids will raise their hand and some will say, don't you think that's wrong that not everyone gets to go to an amusement park? Maybe your parents shouldn't be the ones making the decision. I say, now you're into that conversation. And
Hmm.
then you say, so does it always have to be a man and a woman? Which is fine, but why are we doing this in math
Yeah,
class? Also, should we talk about why you're driving a car because of global warming? And it like that just keeps heaping more stuff into the word problem to the point where you don't even remember that you're supposed to solve a math problem.
right.
A lot of the teachers I spoke to who've had to do this will tell me that the kids get confused because at the end of it, they're like, no, wait, what am I supposed to say? What am I doing?
Yeah,
So, I mean, it just goes on and on. I think I advocate in the book for just cutting education back down to the basics, math, English, language arts, social studies, history,
yes,
and, some other basics. Um, Not only would it be less stress on the teachers, but let's let the social issues be taught at home. Let's let certain things be taught in college. Um, I just think that it needs to be simplified. We keep adding more to it as if adding more to it is going to make society better. I
right.
just don't see that happening, honestly. The other thing, too, is that I'm sure you've seen the statistics that in Chicago, the city of Chicago, less than eight, no, less than 6% of the kids graduating are reading and doing math at grade level. In fact, they're all around the seventh grade to fifth grade level.
Yeah,
But then they'll brag that they had an 84% graduation rate. And I'm just like, wait, how is that possible?
yeah,
It's because we're just moving them on, even if they're not educated.
right.
And there's two sides to that. I used to be against that, but I do understand. Like a lot of teachers will remind me that there's more students coming behind them. We can't just keep holding them back year after year if they won't step up and do their work.
Right.
But should we be rewarding them in that way? Maybe there should be an alternative to the graduation certificate.
Yes.
I don't know what the answer is, but it doesn't seem like a good way to just keep pumping out kids who aren't ready to even get a basic job. Even as a plumber, you got to be able to do some basic math and have a conversation. So anyway, I will talk forever. You ask some questions.
No, I agree with you. I think a lot of it has to do with also political reasons. They
It
want
does.
to show that, oh, look, our state is doing this, they ask for grants, they ask for this. A lot of has to do with
Mhm.
money issues.
Yeah.
You have a lot of teachers that, they go into the field to teach and they feel very let down because their expectations of what they were going into are not what it actually is. And then a lot of
Right.
teachers too, they struggle also. Yes, they have the opportunity to have the summers off, but most of the teachers that I've met are tutoring during the summers to make ends meet.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things. And I agree with you. I don't believe what we should bring in social issues. I don't believe we should bring in religious issues. I don't believe that we should bring in a lot of the issues that we're bringing into the school system. As humans, we are not equipped to have complex issues all at once. It just doesn't
Hmm.
grasp most human beings. People get lost in the shuffle. That's
Right.
why everything is made so simple. If you look at any type of marketing, if you look at any type of content that does really well, you'll see that it's structured very simple and to the point. It's brief,
Yes.
blunt, and to the point because that's how
Yeah.
human minds are equipped. When you
That's
start
the
bringing
KISS
in,
principle. Keep it
yeah.
simple, stupid.
Exactly.
Mhm.
When you start bringing in all these issues and all these things, and a lot has to do with people's opinions, I think people have to realize that that's their opinion. What their opinion is doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the next person's opinion.
Right.
And because, certain person learns a certain way does not mean another person's going to learn that way. There's a lot of different issues we can tap into right now, but I really think our school systems are screwed up I think we,
Mhm.
like I had mentioned earlier, we had just dropped. We were at one point in eighth grade, then went to a seventh grade. Now we're at, last time I heard we were at a sixth grade. You said in Chicago now they are between a five and seventh grade level. This is not good,
Mhm.
and
Mm-mm. It's
and
not.
and passing people just to pass them, just to make your percentages look good is not the point. If there is a problem, we should know there's a problem. That way we can address it and get the right programs. I've seen them take away a lot of programs out of good school systems. You have children with disabilities. You have children that don't have, that certain
Hmm.
things, they have difficulties with, that these classes and that they have that pull children out to give children the things they need to make, their developmental skills apart and at level. They're taking these things out. And for what? You know, to put
To
other
save
things
money.
in. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not working. How do you go to a college and not be able to, to read and write on a college level? How do you go to college and not be able to do mathematics on a college level? And even people with that go and they have blue collar jobs, they're going to have difficulties too if they're not,
Yeah.
if they don't have the proper education. You hear how, schools in Europe are taught very differently than how we're taught in
Mhm.
America. And they're excelling. They're excelling, but they don't do
Yeah.
things like Americans do. It's not about it's about not about the money. It's not about getting votes. It's not about pleasing, the states and the people in the states, politicians wanting to please people in the states because they know how they think and they want their votes. It's about the children. That's what it boils down to. We have to think about what's
Yes,
best for the children, and we're missing that. We're not looking at that, and that's a problem.
that's true. One of the things I forgot to mention too is there's, I think, 9 states, but I know California is one. They did away with the gifted programs. And they said because the kids who don't make it into gifted feel bad. And I said, but what about the kid who is now in class and he's already above that level? Now he's bored.
Hmm.
Like we shouldn't. We're taking away the incentives sometimes. I think. Look, there are kids who are super smart. It just is what it is, and there are kids who are a little slower to grab. I have a friend of mine who went on to play pro basketball. Okay, I wasn't born with his height or his skill,
Hmm.
and so, but I didn't sit back and bemoan that fact. That
Right.
just is, he was gifted at. I know kids who, my son is very good at math. It's a funny story too, because I told when got to go to college and he didn't know what he wanted to do. And I said, well, why don't you, since you're good at math, why don't you do like engineering? Or I started listing things that math were a part of. And he said, well, Dad, just because I'm good at math doesn't mean I like it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, okay. All right. That point I can understand. You beat me there." But he's good at math naturally. And there are people who are just good at math. There are people that are good writers. I
Hmm.
have a friend of mine who is an excellent writer. Jealous. But that's his skill.
Yeah.
We shouldn't, if he was in school now, we wouldn't say, well, you know what, you're going to have to write at this level. We don't want you excelling ahead of your schoolmates. That doesn't make
Right.
any sense.
Yeah.
Another problem. So you mentioned money earlier, and this is where I get into most of my, if I'm having a debate, uh, always when you're watching TV and they're talking about education, every politician says we need more money.
Hmm.
We don't need more money. If money was the issue, education would be already be fixed.
Right.
Most state budgets are 25 to 30%
Hmm.
just education.
Right.
And but what's happening is that if you notice, every year they keep adding more money to the education pot, but the teachers aren't getting raises.
Right.
But the district people are, and they're hiring more people to micromanage the teachers, which is putting
Yes.
more stress on them. When you have multiple people at a district making 300,000 a year, and a teacher who's doing the really hard work at the ground level, making
Yes.
60 to 65, that's not a That's not a good balance, and they understand that that's not fair to them. And look, I'm an entrepreneur, and I feel like I'm a capitalist. But there is moral capitalism,
Yeah.
and even though the your school system is government, it's not capitalism. There's still an imbalance in that pay that should not be going on.
Hmm.
If you look at the statistics, and I haven't looked at them in a while, but the amount of money that is being paid in salaries at the district level over the past 20 years, I think has
Yeah.
gone up something like 374%,
Right.
whereas the teacher's pay has only gone up something like 33%.
Right.
Okay. Well, there's a place we can start. We can move some of that money to the teachers. Teachers don't get bonuses either.
Yeah.
Teachers don't get, they have to pay for their own stuff. We'll spend 250 to $300 a year. My wife will on her class.
I know. I
If you
think
were
that's
working at a
crazy.
corporation, you would turn in your receipts
Hmm.
and they would reimburse you for that.
Yes.
They don't do that for education.
Mm.
Why? Um, you're The other problem with money too is this. Uh, so do you know what Title One is?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so a lot of people might not. So let me explain it. So Title One is a program. It used to be for schools where were in poor areas where the test scores were below a certain level. They would get extra money per
Right.
student. And it's a substantial amount of money. A school like that could get an extra 150,000 a year in Title One money. It was designed to help low performing schools.
Right.
Under the Obama administration, and actually before, it wasn't just him, it was starting to gradually move this way. They made it so that it wasn't about test scores, it was about free and reduced lunch.
Hmm.
And so if you had enough kids on free and reduced lunch, then you got the Title One funds.
Okay.
Well, what's happened, that's a welfare program you set up. So many schools I went to in upper middle class areas were getting Title One funds.
Oh, really?
And I would talk to you talk to the principal and it's like, yeah, we make sure we get enough parents to sign that form. They don't verify whether the parent is unemployed or living below the poverty line. You just have to say, I want my kid to have free and reduced lunch.
Wow.
And if you get 40% of it, your students saying that, then you get extra money. So here's my thing about money. This is what I always tell people. There are very poor areas that really do need that extra money.
Yes.
And I won't name any counties that I've been in because I don't want to unfairly single them out.
Hmm.
But I have been in counties where it was very poor and they had so much technology in all the schools. In fact, let's go back 10 years ago when we first started this. You remember the old library cart that they would roll around school with the books on
Yeah.
it?
Hmm.
They had converted those over to have iPads. They had so many iPads, but
Wow.
in schools where they weren't getting Title One funds, they only had 1 to 2 iPads per classroom
Oh, wow.
because they couldn't afford them.
Hmm.
But guess what? The schools where that weren't getting the Title One funds were still doing better year after year after year than the schools that were getting the Title One money. Because
Really?
it's not about the money, it's about the quality, it's about what, the policies that go on in the school. It's also about we'll go one of the now I'm going to get off on a rant here. One of the things that people also don't understand, and I do want people to really get this, is that it's really what goes on at home.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things my wife has told me this, but I had a teacher in Florida tell me this. She said, a kid who goes home, he doesn't even know if what he's having for dinner. Maybe one parent's in jail, the other one's selling drugs, or not even employed. Doesn't have clothes that are that look like they were bought within the past 10 years.
Right.
Is hungry. How are you going to override that with the minimum amount of time that they are at school? I've
Yeah.
been in elementary schools where kids didn't want to go home. They wanted to stay at school because there they got food. The
Hmm.
teacher seems like they care. and it's very structured in school, which they don't have in their real life. And one of the
Yeah.
things I always tell people is that if you think that free range raising your kids is a good thing, you know, kids, they don't know anything about the world. The world's scary.
Yeah.
They need a parent to say, I got this. This is what we're doing. We're going to do it this way. This is what is best.
Yeah.
And not leaving it on them as a young child.
Right.
And so, what happens in school with grades, a lot of times in poor areas, the teachers are just fighting an uphill battle. And let's face it, too, I know people hate this next thing I'm going to say, but it is what it is. A lot of times in wealthier areas, the people have habits and they pass those habits on to their kids.
Yeah.
And, or they're very firm about, we're not going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to fail. And people who are struggling, even if it's not their fault, they don't have time for that. Even if you're a single mom and you have three kids and you're living below the poverty line, your whole time is trying to figure out how to keep everybody fed, alive, and get them through school.
Yes.
There's not a lot of time for anything else.
Yeah.
That means not helping them with homework, and maybe they're in that situation because they didn't get a good education when they were young, and now they
Right.
can't help their kids.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I always tell people, by the way, is that most schools offer free tutoring. You
Yes.
don't have to pay for tutoring,
Right.
but you might have to get them there an hour before school starts
Yes.
or keep them an hour afterwards. Um, but that's one of the things that never gets talked about. There was a moment, I think, so it would have been so 8 years, about 12 years ago, that we had a governor in Georgia, and I liked him, met him. He was a good guy, but his wife had been a teacher, and he decided that they were going to take over schools that had been failing for, I think it was, if it was 6 years in a row,
Mm-hmm.
that the state was going to take them over and run them. And I went on the radio and then I wrote an op-ed about the fact that makes no sense.
Yeah.
What is the state going to do that they can't do at the county level?
Right.
And so I laid out the fact that all these schools that they listed on their website are in very, very low income areas.
Yeah.
You need to revitalize the area. You need to take care of those areas if you want to get the
100%.
kids doing better in school. If a kid is worried about, you know, things that a middle class, upper middle class, a wealthier child, no matter what their race is, they go home to a well-rounded house where they have heat, they have food, they don't have any worries.
Right.
They're going to obviously do better. That's just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think we forget that. We think that the teachers are like superhuman.
Yeah.
They can overcome that, but that's just not possible.
No. There's a
My wife has had kids who come to school smell, and I will tell you this is an interesting thing because this used to be if a kid came to school smelling like ammonia, it might mean that their cats peed on their clothes and maybe the parents don't wash their clothes, and that happens quite a bit more often than you realize.
wow.
But now the smell of ammonia can also mean that there's making meth in the house.
Oh, wow.
So it gets tricky because now are you going to tell defects? Maybe it's just maybe it's an issue where they're just not keeping them clean,
Right.
but maybe it's a drug issue. It's very difficult to make that, you know, declaration.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of issues that really need to be met, and there's a lot of issues where even that I've noticed poor towns, poor areas, they get very there's been a lot of corrupt issues also where, money has been given to that area, that county, and it never made it to the school system, sadly. So
No.
there's a lot of issues that need to be met, and I think we're focusing on the wrong things, and we really need to be focusing
Mhm.
on the important issues. And it is true. It's there are a lot of issues that we really need to, people need to really sit down and understand, and the parents need to understand too. So if the parents understand, they can advocate,
Mhm.
and for the people who are running the school systems, they really need to sit down and really think about what's important and what's in the best interest of the child, because that's what's being ignored. It's not what, what the child needs. It's what they think the child needs. But they need to really look at the data, and they need to
Mhm.
really look at what the child really needs. Now, in your book, what are some of the things that you emphasize? What made you motivate you to write this book, and what points did you want to get across to the reader?
Well, what motivated me was very simple because what I would hear on the outside and what I would hear from teachers on the inside were completely competing, different messages. And I started thinking about it and I thought, you know what, the message you hear on the outside is coming from politicians, it's coming from advocacy groups, um, and they have an agenda. They just do. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing all the time, but it's an agenda nonetheless. Whereas when you listen to a teacher, they're just trying to make their job more efficient, and their suggestions are more constructive criticism than it is to tear down everything.
Hmm.
And so I thought, you know what? The reason you, by the way, teachers are not really allowed to talk publicly about what goes on. That's
Right,
why you don't hear a lot of them, and you don't even see that many books from teachers.
right.
Trust me, if you could shoot a reality show in your average school, you, you would make the Kardashians look like Sanka. But the one of the things I just wanted people to really kind of know the truth. I wanted to give them something to think about and consider. Um, and I also wanted them to understand because a lot of times people really come down on the teachers, but you have to remember the teachers are the worker bees at the bottom doing the policies that are handed down above. They
Right.
don't have a say in it. So when
Hmm.
you're yelling at a teacher, they can't really change the policies of the school.
Right.
If you don't like them, you have to go above. You just do. You should show up to your commissioner's meeting. You should show up to the school meetings. Let your voice be heard.
Yes.
But in here, I have it divided up into money, parents, students, administrators, and then we go into the unions. We go into different ways of learning, which I highlight from different scientists who studied how the brain works in kids. And one of the places this really comes into effect. So let's go back to when Common Core was introduced.
Hmm.
So the idea behind it was a good idea. It was uh, it was not implemented well, and it also got kind of hijacked by a lot of college academics. You remember earlier conversation about how I hate math. Well,
Hmm.
if you're in college and you love math, you think everyone should love math, but that's just not that's
Yeah.
just not reality.
Right.
Um, but the what happened with Common Core is everybody remembers how all the complaints about the math.
Yeah.
Um, so instead, do you know what the standard algorithm is? You probably learned how to add and subtract. That's where you
Mhm.
stack the numbers and you add down.
Yeah.
In some districts, they won't let a teacher teach it that way until after fifth grade. They want them to learn it seven other ways,
Oh, wow.
seven ways to do the same problem. And the idea, if you read the white papers from a lot of the academics who wrote the policies on Common Core, was that if the kid learns how to do it the other seven ways, then they'll really understand what the math means. Well, okay. So here's the problem with that. These are people who have not been in an elementary school or a middle school and had
Yeah.
to work with that age group. What every single teacher told me without fail is that the kid who understands the seven different ways was the kid who was already good at math.
Hmm.
But now the kids who were struggling with math, they're confused by all the steps in the seven different ways, and they're getting them mixed up between the different ways of doing it, and they're doing worse, which is
Yeah.
why math scores plummeted after the introduction of Common Core.
Right.
And they're also so what they're teaching in Georgia, for instance, where I live, what most counties are teaching a kid in fourth grade, I didn't learn until eighth grade or
Right.
ninth grade. They're dividing fractions in third grade
Right.
and fourth grade. And it's not to say they can't all do it, but it is a struggle. And what I had a teacher put it to me this way. She said they're trying to pack too much too early into their little heads,
Yeah.
and it's just too much sometimes.
Right.
And what they just to keep making it harder and harder and harder. Back when we started the company was when Common Core was being implemented, was the year before. And every district person I talked to would say, we're rigor. We want it to be more rigorous. Rigor, rigor, rigor. That's all I heard was rigor. Well, they increased the rigor and scores went down. And instead of undoing some of the rigor, they just changed how the scoring is done.
Yeah.
So they can say that we're doing it rigorously. But then when scores went down, they said, well, we just won't grade it that way. A good example is that in a lot of elementary schools, they do a process of grading where they grade now instead of one grade for math, you might get 20 grades. So they're doing each standard grade.
Right.
And then I can pinpoint a county, for an example, where you had to get at least 65% of the standards correct to pass math. Well,
Right.
then an unusually high amount of kids started failing math. So what did they do? They said, okay, 40% of the standards right, and you can pass math. But that's not, that goes back to what we were talking about with Chicago. You're now letting them pass and they don't know it. They don't know the
Yeah.
material.
Right.
Maybe we should not be teaching it so young. Maybe we should loosen it up a little bit and make it easier enough for them to understand. It's very
Yes.
think about teaching a kid dividing fractions, and they've never even handled money hardly at that age. They've
Right.
never handled anything of real consequence. They play video games, they play whatever. What do they know about a fraction and dividing
Right.
it and stuff? Um, that's where the thing in California I was telling you about, where they won't give below a D. You cannot fail. Even if you answer no questions on a test, you still get a D. That's where that comes from, is because they made the rigor so hard that when the kids started failing, they said, well, we got to have more kids passing. Okay, we'll just fix the grading. That's what the problem is. And so they made it harder and made it easier to get a bad grade and still pass. And that's when I think I can't remember if it was you earlier or if we were on here, but there's a lot of common sense things that go on that I just don't understand that. I think if I had been running education, I would have said, why don't we go back to making dividing fractions maybe seventh grade?
Yeah. But
Maybe we should make it a bit easier for that age group. I don't know. That just
yeah.
seems more realistic, in my opinion, than fixing the grading.
Well, I noticed when my children were younger, now they're all grown up, but they were, they started making implementing all these changes for my second and third child. And what I noticed is that they got very stressed out. And I always said that I think by the time all these kids hit college, they're all going to be on Xanax because they were just too overwhelmed. And,
Yeah.
a lot of them have that nervous and overwhelmed personality. And I think it starts in the school system. I think it starts at home. You're putting too much on these children when they're in elementary school, and they should learn it a lot slower like we did, and when they
Mhm.
get to college, if they don't make the level for college math or college English, they always had those courses where you could take to get yourself a par. And then, and for people who are they're doing, blue collar jobs and they're working with their hands. If they have have problems
Hmm.
in certain areas, you could always go to a community college and get a little bit
Yeah.
brushed up in those areas if you really needed to. There's always a solution,
Yeah.
but putting too much on anybody too soon, too quickly, it's going to overwhelm anybody, no matter what age you are, because
Yeah.
everybody, does not, absorb, the same way the materials and the content and the information that we're being taught. Everyone has their own way of
Yeah.
learning. And
Yeah. Some people are visual. Some people like to work in groups. Some want to work alone. Some people like to read.
yeah.
And out of those different methods, there are people who have a variation of some of those things.
And the learning
Um,
system in Europe, I think, is much better. And I think they excel much quicker. But they don't do things the way we do things. They do things
well, they've
a
not
lot
let
differently.
politics get into their education system, is what it seems to me in studying their education system. And
Hmm.
here we have too many. I have a small blurb in the book about how politicians will often run on how they're going to fix education. They don't know anything about what's going on.
No.
That's a political platform, but
Hmm.
then they'll feel the need to make some adjustments or policy prescriptions, and then they don't understand the unintended consequences of what they're doing.
Right.
Um, and that's a problem. In my opinion, if you haven't worked in education, you should not be the one. I don't think that you should be making those decisions, honestly.
A hundred
I just
percent.
don't.
I think it's the people who are working with the children who know firsthand what's going on. They should have the biggest word, and the biggest say.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
and that they should be the ones giving the feedback and the advice. And it's the ones that are up on the
Mhm.
upper end that should be listening because they don't know what's going on. They make the
Yeah.
final call. And for the politicians, I think it's more so, being able to stay in office as long as possible and let's make this one happy and let's make that one happy and not really understand what's going on because a lot of times, decisions are made
Mhm.
and they're made about all different types of topics, but they don't have a clue about those topics.
No.
They just do it,
I actually often think that they don't want those solutions. You know why? Because I can run on them again in 4 years or 2 years or whatever.
exactly.
If you keep fixing if you get up and say everything's good, you probably don't get elected.
Right.
And that's kind of a problem because now you have to sometimes and you have to sometimes take small problems and trump them up bigger
Hmm.
and get them to the point where everybody's worked up about them. Um, and I and what we were talking about earlier, I made this analogy one last year when I was talking to someone else that a lot of times when I would speak to teachers at the beginning of a school year, they would, we'd be alone and they would say, you know what they want us to do this year? And they would tell me and they go, you know what's going to happen? This is
Hmm.
what's going to happen. And they were always right because
Yeah.
they're the ones at the ground level having to try and implement it. And they understand where the roadblocks are going to be. They understand where things are going to get tripped up. But the person who's at the district level or the state level, whatever, says, you know what would be a good idea?
Hmm.
This. And I just think that it seems too, like in some states, I noticed that the person running the state's education had been a teacher at some point, but they seem to either have lost touch or the problem with you, I think you pointed out, is that a lot of times politicians, they say stuff because they want to get elected, and that doesn't always make good policy. It
Right.
just doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Now, if you had you tell people why they should buy your book, what is the reason why people need to read your book?
Well, I think if you have kids in school, or if you have kids coming in school, this is the one I lay. It's a big book. I lay out everything that's going on that I saw personally. I also interviewed 69 former administrators and teachers who had just retired to ask them what had changed about education in their time. All
Hmm.
of them retired with over 30 years of experience. So
Right.
you can tell they're very succinct in what they have to talk about.
Right.
Um, I also tell some stories in here that I came across. But more than that, I also have the pros and cons of private school, charter, homeschool, and I have the real data in there. It took me 4 years to study all this and investigate everything and get it down to, and a lot of it's hard because when you go Googling things, a lot of times people who uh, have a desire to keep all of the data from being known, they put out so much stuff that you have to get 3 or 4 or 5 pages
Yeah.
into it to really find what you're looking for. And in some cases, like when it came down to state data, as it compares to across the country, I had to create a spreadsheet and go to each individual state's scores and put together my own algorithm to try and solve what I was reading. Um, but I lay it all out in here. I lay out alternatives. I lay out uh, some things that prescriptions that I think parents should start paying attention to.
Right.
Um, and I lay out some stuff in here too that I think that school districts and teachers should start paying attention to.
Right.
I'm not very hopeful that there will be a wholesale change in education. The problem is that the people I mentioned earlier who are making all the money at the top, they don't really have an incentive. You would think they would have incentive because they want the kids to do better,
Yeah.
but really they're just looking out for their own job,
Right.
um, which is a sad, that's a sad way to look at it. I often criticize a lot of politicians or even the unions because when you hear them talk, they never mention, and I reviewed a lot, they never mention the kids, not
Yeah.
once. They
Mm.
mention money, they mention teachers, they mention um, social issues,
Right.
but they never mention the kids. And I would think that an education-based institution or somebody at the political level who's talking about education would bring up the kids.
Yes.
But there's really nothing to brag about because scores have continually gone down
Right.
year after year after year. They just
100%.
have.
Yeah.
And you would think that this, if you're looking at the trend line and it's going down, that somebody somewhere would say, maybe we are not going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Maybe some things should change.
Hmm.
And so we can try and get this back to a good level.
Right.
People, I've heard conspiracies that they're trying to dumb down the population. I used to think that was bonkers.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll let that slip into my head and go, maybe that's true. I don't know.
Hmm.
I just don't know.
Right. Now, if you had to take today's conversation, you really wanted to emphasize on some important factors, what would you like to emphasize to the audience?
Well, I think one of the things that I want parents to understand that your involvement in your child's education makes a huge difference. It just does. Statistically, teachers will tell you, I can tell are which kids are have involvement at home, and I can tell you the kids who have nobody helping them at home.
Yeah.
You need to, if you want your kids to do well in school, you need to stay involved. And by staying involved, by the way, I have heard this story 1,000 times easily, where a teacher will say at the end of the year, a parent will go, "Oh my God, my kid's not doing very well." Like, I know you've had all year to know that with
Yeah.
conferences, grades coming home, and you're just now realizing this.
Right.
That's too late. Stay involved so that you can, if you find, if they need a tutor or if they need extra help, you can start that sooner rather
Hmm.
than later.
Right.
The more you stay involved, you will mitigate a lot of the problems that we've been speaking about
Yeah.
because you can when I say a kid it's very difficult for a fourth or fifth grader to divide fractions. They can get it, they
Yeah.
can, but they just might have to take more work, more explaining. And
Right.
there's resources now online like never before.
Right.
YouTube, you name it. Our videos, I believe, are they're a different company name, but they're out there. um, you can find help. Now, one of the things when I was a kid, we always had textbooks that matched up to the teacher's workbook, and those workbooks had the test or quizzes that you took, so everything was in alignment. That's the one thing that has gone away, and I wish would come back is that
Yeah.
nowadays most teachers are required to create their own quizzes. They're required to create their own resources for teaching. And a lot of them pay for them. There's a website that is making millions of dollars. I think they were just bought. It's called Teachers Pay Teachers, and it's where teachers who create educational resources like graphics, quizzes, tests, even videos. You can sell them to other teachers on this website,
Yeah.
and teachers go and buy them because they're required now to find their own resources.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's off the subject from the question. Stay involved with your kids' education. It doesn't mean you have to spend 2 hours a night, but you need to know what's going on. Ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they understand everything. Take a look
Yes.
in what they're bringing home and see if, because look, I didn't always tell my parents the truth about how I was doing in math or other
Yeah.
classes. I just wanted them to get off my back. Don't let that happen. Look at their actual what's actually being sent home
Right.
and look at their grades. Most school districts now have they keep the grades updated in real time. You can usually see it on an app.
Yes.
My wife knows when our kids were still in school, why is there a zero
Right.
when that homework assignment? We
Yes.
need to talk about that.
Yes.
Stay involved. Stay involved.
100%.
That
Now,
would be the best advice I could give.
no, I think that's excellent advice. I think all the takeaways you gave were great advice, and I think everything you said today was very meaningful. You shared a lot of great knowledge, and if people want to buy your book, where can they find your book?
It's on all the majors. It's on you can get it as an iBook. You can get it on Amazon as a print or an ebook. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's on. I think there's 10 sites where you can get the ebook. You can get it in paperback on Barnes and Noble or Amazon typically.
Now, do you have a
And I
web?
have a website, by the way. It's BryanThomasWetzel.com. It's BryanThomasWetzel.com. On that site, I have links to all the different stores, and I have a little write up about the book and some other stuff. If you go on Amazon, uh, Amazon will let you actually, I believe it's 7 pages. You can download 7 pages of your choosing, and you can read a little sample and see if it's something that interests you.
Oh, great. Well, this has been wonderful, Brian. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This information has been wonderful. I think you've brought a lot of knowledge and people need to understand what's going on. I think a lot of people are clueless of what's going on in the school systems.
Mhm.
They just know that it's not where it should be, but they don't understand
Yeah.
why. Or they just don't understand what's important and what's not really important and how by putting other things into the learning system, how it's going to affect our children. And so people have to have a clear understanding of what needs to be emphasized, what needs to be focused on, and what doesn't need to be focused on in order for our children to have the best education possible. And I think you've really put out a lot of great pointers today. And I thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you'll come back and we could talk about more topics in the future.
Absolutely. And I have another book coming out next year that's completely off this topic. So I would love to come back on. And thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh, you're very welcome. And you have a great day.
All right. Have a good one.